Hey, this is David Lee Kim from Omniscient Digital, and you're listening to The Long Game. In this Kitchenside episode, we talk about the difference between creating and capturing demand. And throughout this conversation, we realized that what started off seeming like two different things actually ended up being very similar. So for all the companies trying to create new categories for their products, what we realized is it all comes down to the same human desires, the same human pain points. There's always some existing pain point. Just because a company is creating a new product doesn't mean they're creating a new pain point that they're solving for. So that's what you speak to. Then we talked about ways to start building awareness to introduce your product as the new solution to those customer pains. I won't give away more details, but this was a fun thought exercise and really timely as more and more companies are starting to tell the narrative of creating a new category. And if that's you, I hope this conversation is helpful. So today we're going to talk about what it means to meet demand or establish demand. I think maybe a good place to start is, what does it mean? Like, what do we mean when we say demand here? Alex, you want to take that one?
Well, I'm kind of conjecturing, but I think that we mean if there's keyword search volume or not, because there's a demand in terms of like categories. Like if you, like Salesforce created the category essentially of like cloud software and CRM software. And I think that's category creation, but I feel like we're not thinking that broadly. I think we're thinking more in lines of, in terms of content creation, are there people searching for something already? Do they know what they're searching for? And are they using those words? And if they're not, I think you're in the business of creating demand. Is that how you would think of it, Ali? Or am I missing
about
anything?
it, I think about like meeting demand versus establishing demand through content in regards to the business. So using content to basically drive sales. And whether or not you're meeting the demand for the solution that the business provides, or establishing demand in that you explain to a customer or to a consumer why they should want this or should be interested in this. So it's somewhere in between the whole category thing, like you were talking about, and the content itself. That's the way I think about it. I don't know if that's why this whole topic is
It's a little nebulous.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe one other layer I'll add in is, I think in this conversation, we might be talking more about the overall like industry or market demand versus like demand generation, which is like you're just trying to build up demand for your particular product in an existing market. Mm-hmm. So I think most people in demand generation roles are more around like they're trying to capture existing market demand, like it's an established market and they're just trying to get their product into their hands. For this conversation, it might be more like creating demand around a new product or a new category that people aren't aware about versus a category or industry people are already aware about that you just need to capture their interest, which is what most demand gen marketers do, I think.
I do think though, when it comes to content, like for any brand, and I think about the company I'm with now, like there's a large segment of potential customers that don't even know that our company offers what they do that I'm trying to sell. So when it comes to the way we break down our content strategy, we have to service, obviously, the segment of the customer base that knows we exist, and we just have to tell them, we have this is why you should want it, etc. Which is where most like SEO content plays, is meeting people where they are. They're searching for a problem. Like we're going to meet them where they are, deliver a solution. That's really simplifying, obviously, what content marketing does. But there's a large segment of people out there that are, I don't know, totally potentially our customers, but they don't even know that we provide this solution. And SEO isn't the best way to get in front of them because they don't know what they don't know, right? So I think both can exist. And depending on your role on a content team or a marketing team, you might be tackling one or the other, because the process, I think, is pretty different.
Yeah. One thing I'm thinking about is there's multiple layers of how we could establish what demand means. If we trace it back, like there's a pain point that a customer's going to have. And like, I'm using an example in my brain of like snowplow analytics. And they were one of the first kind of open source analytics platforms out there. But the pain point was still there. They didn't have to create the pain point of wanting to track your visitors and your product users, right? So I think there is a little bit like that part of demand is inelastic. I think that is not something you can create. What you can start to create is that voice of customer, what words people use to describe it, sort of a forming in their mental picture of a new category that is open source analytics. It's apart from, say, Google Analytics. And then it's like the awareness of your product and your specific part in that market. Because I read this tweet. It's really opportune timing that we're doing this podcast for many reasons. But this was like 2 days ago. Some guy tweeted, demand capturing has suddenly become uncool. To be a cool growth marketer today, you need to be, quote, creating demand through immeasurable channels like dark social. I'm here to tell you that most industries have plenty of existing demand and there's nothing wrong with capturing it.
Yeah. Everyone's always like, oh, we're creating a new category. I'm like, no, you're not. You're definitely not.
I think for the most part, people aren't, right? When they say they are.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting follow-up that I saw to that was Joel Kletke, a friend of mine. He said, you can't create demand. You can only jujitsu demand / desires that already exist. And I think that jujitsuing is what, Ali, you were talking about, in the fact that there's many potential customers that share that pain point. Yeah. And you're doing a little jujitsu, you're doing a little magic to transmute that into your specific iteration of that category.
Well, when you think about like the hierarchy of needs, right? Like going way back to basics, like there's really only... we can get a whole conversation about needs versus wants, but there's really only a set number of things that we genuinely need, like solutions that we need to have solved. Obviously, that has evolved over time as we've gotten more stuff, more technology, more money, whatever. But when you think about like trying to tell somebody that they should care about something, it's getting harder and harder nowadays. Like I think the example that comes to mind is like plant-based milk, right? Like we didn't really have any demand for like oat milk or soy milk or any of that shit. I think some people knew there was a problem with like maybe how they process dairy or like caloric intake or whatever, but it was a whole new message of like, this exists and you should want it and here's why. But I mean, besides that, like nowadays, I can't really think about anything. Maybe I'm drawing a blank, but like I said, I think the margin is getting smaller in terms of like, here's a brand new category, here's a brand new thing that's solving this problem that you didn't even know you had. You know, I think nowadays it's almost like creating issues to then be solved. So
that creating issues is super fascinating. I want to dive into that because it made me think about several years ago, I started drinking bulletproof coffee, which now I think is silly because I've done more research onto actual, nutrition and realized that drinking butter every morning is not for my lipids.
Wait, I should stop doing that?
Well, there's the whole keto thing, right? Like there's some arguments that, could be good for certain conditions, but I wonder, where did that demand come from? The fact that I enjoyed coffee. Why did I have to go dip my toes into bulletproof coffee? I don't know where that originated. I think it was something that I did because I felt like it was going to improve my mental clarity. So I guess that demand, that pain point was still there. It felt like a nootropic to me of sorts. But yeah, that plant-based milk is a really interesting example because it's like, that was category creation. That was demand creation in a way. 40 years ago, nobody did that.
Like it solved problems. I'm lactose intolerant, TMI, but that solved problems for me that I didn't realize were possible to be solved. So like some of it's very welcome. But I also think like the elasticity in terms of like always looking for something new, like that's a larger reflection on our society. I think we're always used to like looking at something new, looking for something bigger, brighter, whatever. So there's lots of room to establish demand for things. I think people are more open to it than ever. But I wonder how many people still do bulletproof coffee, like the longevity of it, the impact of like creating those new categories or subcategories or some products. Like I would be curious to see like how sticky things are. Like the newer things, I feel like they're not as sticky.
Well, maybe, they tap into an existing desire, which is maybe to lose weight, maybe to have better focus. But then there's an evangelist or somebody who goes and kind of digs at those pain points and they create a solution, typically like bulletproof coffee. But I think the effect that they create is longer lasting and wider than their specific product, because you could argue that Dave Asprey in doing so, like created a whole new niche of products, right? Perfect Keto. That's a whole brand that's been created in that space. And maybe I'm ignorant on this. Maybe this stuff existed before that, but there had to be somebody who acted as that evangelist who told everybody, hey, here's your problem, right? Like here is a potential solution, and then evangelize that It's like Wim Hof, right? Wim Hof is all into the ice baths. Now there's like 10 companies that sell $10,000 ice baths, which didn't exist 10, 20 years ago. And you could go, like I have a place down the street from me called Generator Athlete Lab where I do sauna and ice bath. And it's like, where did that come from? Some crazy Dutch dude named Wim Hof basically just went on a bunch of podcasts and talked about it.
So what's interesting in this conversation is we're kind of getting to this thing is there are the basic human needs, because we're talking about consumer products, right? Like Ali, you're lactose intolerant. You didn't know oat milk existed. They need to go market and know their persona and speak to that pain point of being lactose intolerant and say, there's a new solution here. And so there's an existing pain point. It's not like existing demand because they don't know oat milk exists, but you then go educate them on this new solution, which I think you can say there's probably a hierarchy of needs in business as well. Like there's probably things that every marketer or salesperson needs to be thinking about. They all have the same pain points. And for these B2B solutions, they come in, some of them might actually be like novel solutions that they have to like point at this pain point and say, the existing solutions aren't working for you because XYZ. Right. Here's how we solve for those things. And then there's that evangelist aspect where the first people to find out about the solution are like, hey, like, you know, this thing that we all hate because there's no other better solution. I found a better solution. And then that's how to snowball. I think that seems to be what people are calling like establishing or creating demand, right?
What's that interesting too about that analogy is like, it's not too hard to establish demand with the first segment of your audience, like for the oat milk situation, like the lactose intolerant people, like they're like, oh shit, this is awesome. Of course I want to try this. What's interesting is the adoption of folks that don't necessarily need it. That must be really an interesting part of their marketing strategy. And that to me is like changing, like wholeheartedly changing people's minds, like solving problems that weren't really problems to begin with, or becoming a brand new part of someone's lifestyle when they don't really need it. And I think that that's like kind of the two-parter of establishing demand is obviously establishing demand with people who like are problem aware. Maybe they don't know the solution exists, but they at least have a problem that can be solved, losing weight, you know, down to those basic needs. But then there's the people that don't really have a problem. And like, what's their motivation? Like, what's that discovery process like? And how do you get in front of that with content, right? Like that's gotta, like, it's not going to be Google because those people aren't even searching for things that would then help them find your content. So that's where, like, I think that when it trickles down to content marketing, it becomes really interesting.
I think one really good example of this outside of the plant milk stuff is product-led growth. Do we all know enough about that to kind of trace back that history? Because now it's something where people who quote unquote don't need it are trying to use it, right? It's one of those things that your VP might say, like, we need to do product-led growth, even if you're not a product-led growth company. It's becoming one of those buzzwords. Same thing happened with CRO back in the day, and experimentation. People would hear it at a conference or on a podcast or something, and they'd say, we need that. But I think it started out with a couple of people who really knew what they were talking about, started to evangelize it, started to maybe write some guest posts. I think a lot of this stuff starts out in conferences and communities too. It doesn't start out on search, right? But that was one that was pretty interesting to me to see, because now there's full conferences and companies that are like product-led growth companies. And that was within the span of what, 6-7 years? I feel like it wasn't earlier than that.
Yeah. That's I've even had multiple calls with founders creating, I mean, it's evolved into offshoots like product-led sales now. There's software built for quote product-led sales. And maybe if we run with that analogy, it started off with just some product or marketing people were like, hey, we should try to grow this through whatever tactics, and it works for them. And then they go to a conference and they tell their friends about it and how it's working. And then someone decides to call it product-led growth. And then there's more case studies about it working. And then VCs like OpenView start talking about it. And all of a sudden now everyone's trying to do product-led growth, and there's a whole market created with software for it.
This is like Asprey's Law. We've got to call it something like that. Like wherever there is new category creation, there's somebody selling a product or course with that framework or title, right? Because and that's the case in a lot of these things. It's like somebody creates growth hacking or somebody creates product-led sales. Sometimes it's to create a product in that space, but a lot of the time it's to do consulting or to sell a course or establish themselves as an expert. in an adjacent but almost similar field as to what existed before. Because, well, actually, this is a side example, but product-led content is one thing that we know natively because I wrote that blog post in 2019, and we just talked about it today. Ahrefs just wrote a post on the same topic, product-led content, and I just looked at the SERPs for it, and I'm not ranked first. Like there's like 10 articles.
You got taken over?
I got taken over, but it's like, who knows if like people read that initial thing that I wrote or simultaneously came up with the same idea. It could have been either way, but it's one of those things that did snowball. And now it's not necessarily like a well-known category, but didn't talk about product-led content 5 years ago either.
Yeah. We're talking a lot about the idea of creating or establishing demand. And it seems like, I mean, all this seems to boil down to a couple of things. It's creating that phrase or whatever, like Drift created conversational marketing. There's product-led growth. And a lot of the creating demand is probably not measurable. Like Alex, you even mentioned going to conferences and just talking to people, or dark social, as people call it. You just Slack your friends and be like, oh, you should check out this thing. And what about meeting demand, which I guess we started off this conversation talking about in terms of SEO or things that have search volume. When should someone decide like, oh, I'm going to be capturing demand versus establishing demand? Like if a marketer is listening to this, which hopefully they are, how do they decide like, oh, I'm going to go create a new market, or I'm going to try to capture existing demand?
I want to make a quick, maybe contrarian argument that I know we're probably all associating SEO in our heads with capturing demand, but I don't think it's necessarily that. I think you can create demand with SEO as well. I look at SEO as a distribution channel and also research, right? Mm-hmm. It's pain points captured surreptitiously without the user knowing that you're capturing it. Somebody typing in CRM software is them saying they want CRM software, and they're using that language to tell you that. So I think, finding the pain point, like you can do that through customer research or trial and error. I don't know how Drift came up with conversational marketing, but I think those things exist, and SEO can be a data point for that. And you can still adjust the article and talk about what you're talking about in a different way. Whereas you capture, I guess, the search traffic and the demand that's there for that word, but you can still create demand within that piece for something new. And I think that's where you can blend some SEO and thought leadership.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the segment of the audience that knows they have a problem and they know they need to figure out a solution. So going back to like plant-based milk, like you could trickle down the content to addressing words like lactose intolerance or like milk alternatives. Like there's other ways to get in front of someone who didn't know you existed, almost using Google as that billboard, like driving awareness, creating like not demand for the product yet, but at least like introducing yourself through that kind of content. And that's where people step into the funnel, right? Like now they're problem aware and now they're solution aware. Like, oh, interesting. Like this is now a thing. The difference is just like, it's brand new to them. So it might take a little bit more time understanding, what is this? Is this accurate? Right? Like, is this real? And I think that's where like original thought, original data storytelling, sitting down with founders, sitting down, like building that trust, right? So if it's like a brand new solution, someone didn't know it was a thing, that's where thought leadership or leveraging SEO to distribute thought leadership, that's where it comes into play more so than just like answering questions or like giving really basic content, which, we've talked a lot about how those two can go hand in hand. But yeah, that's kind of where I see SEO playing a role, depending on if people know what they're looking for. If people don't know what they don't know, it's a whole different ballgame.
There is probably a case where it's hard to find any search volume for those pain points. Because I'm thinking of examples. The plant milk one, again, is good. We also had a tea client where we would write, I believe, top of funnel stuff on like more of the benefits of tea. It would be like, articles on losing weight or fasting or whatever kind of things that flow to that. And they would talk about how tea helps with those things. When we did our mini site, cupofkava.com, a lot of what we wrote about was like alternatives to alcohol or, sleep aids and stuff like that. Because I don't think a lot of people, kava is not a new product, but not a lot of people knew kava was a solution to those things. But I can imagine a space like probably open source analytics. Well, I guess then you could write about analytics topics and then introduce your kind of new solution in that space. Well, let me think. So there was a company a couple of years ago that they were one of the first to do SaaS management software. right? To track all of your SaaS tools, your usage, your pricing, your subscriptions, and all that stuff. And when my friends started that company, there wasn't any search volume for anything around that. Like, I don't even know what you would search into Google to describe that problem. So in that case, he did have to do
subscriptions. Yeah.
Right. But there was, no search volume for anything like that. So his play was basically to create a bunch of educational and thought leadership content, distribute that on social. And he did a lot of paid advertising too, right? He would create content that was like deliberately contrarian or, establish a viewpoint, and he would pay to promote it because there was no real distribution channels. So I feel like part of this capture and create demand is also, it's one, like where you get the idea, the data that there is demand for it, but then it's also like how you distribute it. Mm-hmm. SEO just makes those things so much easier because there's demand, and if you like capture that keyword and like write the right piece, it's going to be distributed to those people who are searching for it. So it's kind of a direct line.
Yeah. Like I know we've talked about the SEO sandwich on these podcasts. Like there's a keyword, there's search volume, use thought leadership in writing an article, and you optimize at the end. But I think about the cases where it's like, hey, I just want to get my raw unfiltered thoughts out, where SEO might not be a distribution channel. And that's probably the case where inbound marketing doesn't work, which is ironic because we're HubSpotters or ex-HubSpotters. But it's like, no, when we have something like that, we need to push it out through channels like paid marketing or like sponsoring newsletters and getting in front of the target audience to be like, more of a shock factor, almost like, here's how you currently understand your world, and here's how I'm about to change it with these opinions.
Yeah, it's like growth hacking, but for content, like using really non-scalable ways to get in front of people. Obviously, you have like social and email, but you have to have an email list, and that, if you don't have demand yet, you probably don't have an email list or a following. So there's a lot of probably paid involved partnerships, sponsorships, like places that people would be like, oh shit, I didn't even know that was a thing, depending on what the topic or the brand or the product is. That's where SEO, not even a factor, not yet.
I think HubSpot also said that ads are inbound now. I think they put out that proclamation, so we're all good. It's all inbound.
I think they said calling is inbound too. Inbound calling, they call it. Oh man,
it's funny. Yeah, the SEO sandwich is a great model. Sometimes most of the time, how I write, like I just wrote a piece that I shared with you guys on kind of on content velocity, and like just because it's a long game doesn't mean you need to play it super patiently. You can still be urgent and go out the gates hot. So I didn't have any keywords in mind with that. It was more just through sales calls, through patterns I've recognized with clients, through just generally like knowing the space. But I'm still going to go do some keyword research and try to optimize it for that keyword.
So you didn't write that in mind.
I didn't write it at all with that in mind, but I figure that's just a marginal thing. If I can like capture, I guess, quote, capture some demand there, then I can still do that, even though it's a thought leadership piece in essence.
So I know you're talking about that in terms of writing it as thought leadership. I want to actually talk about that concept of content acceleration in combination with your idea of surround sound, and how that plays into demand creation. Because
surround sound was totally demand creation, wasn't it?
Yeah, but all that together, it's like surround sound, which is building links and like getting listed on all those listicles, with content acceleration, is getting a bunch of content out at once and getting that audience to start seeing your message over and over and over, like multiple times within a short period of time, versus like maybe occasionally finding your content when they search Google. So it's pretty interesting what you're talking about there, where if you're trying to establish demand, they shouldn't just see you once every couple of months. They should start seeing you multiple times. And that's where content acceleration, like producing a lot of content, distributing it on all the channels where your target audience is, running your paid marketing in conjunction with doing a surround sound playbook. Like then you're just going to start blasting the market, and they're going to be like, who the hell is this company that keeps showing up all of a sudden?
Yeah. So one thing with the surround sound thing, because the surround sound strategy is something Scott and I coined at HubSpot, but it's not something like now SEMrush is building a tool around it. We're doing services around it, but there's a problem with I guess, product marketing and positioning there, because it's not something that people get right away when you say surround sound strategy. Like, do you fit that into the playbook of a digital PR executive? Do you fit that into an SEO's playbook? Does that go in the content marketing playbook? Is that a product marketing thing? We're trying to figure out like what words we should use so customers can associate that with something that's already in their minds. There's some words like share of voice that we're starting to use, SERP visibility, but we can't just say surround sound strategy 45 times and have them suddenly click and be like, yeah, I know what that is. Like, we still have to look into what already exists in their lingua franca, the voice of customer, that we can associate that with in their minds. So it's not, I feel like there's never a clear case where you just like create new demand or create a category. I feel like you always do have to associate it with something else.
Yeah. It's like the same way individuals have like the hierarchy of needs. There's like the businesses do too. So every new concept or new tool or something, you have to fit it into like a predetermined set of needs or titles or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I mean, like I've been trying to employ tactics I've learned from you in my job today. And it's like not really my thing, but it's somewhat SEO. And then there's some like PR people involved. And it's like, it's nothing official yet, but I kind of went through the same thought process of like, where does this fit in? And I think it does depend on how individual teams are structured, but it's really exciting. I feel like we're kind of going through the process on our own of establishing demand and finding the fit for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're definitely doing a lot of creating of demand. I feel like it depends how you define it again, but like with the terms that we're putting out into the world, like people are now using the barbell strategy and content economics to build their content playbooks. Like we've seen that happen. Those aren't things that existed before, but again, it's like we used metaphors to get people in the door. It was like, hey, this is content strategy, but we're using financial portfolio modeling to show you a better way to do it. So I don't know, it's kind of a convergence of things that end up being something new. In the same way, like conversational marketing is kind of like inbound marketing meets like messaging. You know, it's like two things that converge to be like a net new thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
It is interesting. Like I had someone actually tweet me recently or DM me on Twitter and was like, hey, you wrote about this barbell strategy thing. I saw this other blog post from a couple of years ago. It's like, didn't know that existed. Like, I'm glad other people are thinking about it this way, but it's actually pretty novel. And this is me tooting our own. It's like pretty novel to think about this different way of approaching content and growth through content. Like, because sometimes the conversation is focused on content quality or word count and things like that. And we're like, no, content's a growth channel. And we're going to figure out how to help you grow through content. And just being able to do all the reporting and attribution and doing the growth modeling is something that most people who work in content aren't familiar with. Mm-hmm. So we're not creating a new solution or demand. We're just saying like, hey, there's a different approach and we're going to show you how we do it.
Yeah. Part of establishing demand could just be slightly changing thought processes about something. It's definitely a spectrum.
The barbell strategy is actually the perfect example of a tool that lets you kind of split between both creating and capturing demand, right? Like that was somewhat of the purpose of the portfolio model. We had like the two ends. You basically pick two extremes. You do nothing in the middle. Every content has a singular purpose, although obviously it can have other beneficial factors to it. But on one end, it's like very product-led, conversion-focused, SEO, predictable. You write this, you know you're going to get like a 1% conversion rate and 10,000 visitors or whatever it is. And then the other side of the barbell is buzzworthy content, which typically say is viral or thought leadership. But I think when it comes down to it, it's like both of them can rank in search, but the main difference is kind of their variance of predictability. So buzzworthy is kind of saying like, we don't know if this is going to work. It might, it may capture some demand, but like we're going out on a limb here and saying like it's suited to like create demand more so than capture demand. Whereas the SEO side of the bucket, the product led stuff, we know there's already demand there. That's inherently the predictability of it. So it's kind of a tool designed to do just what we're talking about.
Yeah. And it's definitely, it falls in line too with what's relatively easy to measure and what's not. So when you think about like pitching that to a higher up, it's like this portion of our strategy is dedicated to, sorry, my stress ball is dedicated to like testing new channels, testing new ideas. Probably won't be able to measure it. That's okay. Here's the potential benefit. But this portion is, easily measurable, meeting demand, like all that stuff. So it kind of falls into.
I definitely feel like now that we're talking about the portfolio model and kind of expected value, it doesn't really make sense to me to go full on like non-measurable stuff, right? Like you have to have a lot of conviction that that's going to work and that's going to resonate. Unless you have some really good data in terms of like pattern recognition, going to conferences that like that word conversational marketing is going to take off, which I'm sure Drift did. And they had a bunch of capital that they could throw into making it happen. But generally speaking, if I'm in charge of growth or marketing, like I want some percentage of my marketing to be predictable.
So where I'm landing on this conversation is the concept of capturing demand versus creating demand is misnomer the right word or false dichotomy? I think it's all just capturing demand. Mm-hmm. It's just one is about educating the market about a new solution, but there's an existing pain point versus a solution that they might already be familiar with. But it all comes down to knowing your persona, what's the pain point you're solving for. It is very unlikely that you've uncovered a brand new pain point in humanity. So you're solving for something, and they know that they either have it and don't know it, or they know they have it and know it. And it's just, how are you getting people to know about your new solution? And there's going to be tangential demand for related products that I already know about that you can then insert yourself into a conversation. But in no case should you be focused on just purely, quote, creating demand or doing the unmeasurable things. Like there's always going to be a way to measure it.
Totally. Yeah.
Am I simplifying it, or is that?
No, I think that's it. I wish I knew offhand like that model. Do you know the product awareness model where it's like a problem aware, solution aware, product aware, whatever it is? I almost feel like that's a better model for all of this, because people at the problem aware stage are probably aware enough to say like, I want to, save money on my SaaS software. Like, and then you have to basically bring them down further to that solution aware stage. And that's that stage between those two, I think, is typically what we call thought leadership, education content, or creating demand. And then the capturing is like solution aware and beyond. Like that's usually the capturing part. I think that's a better model in my mind of those two. I don't know, maybe we're just being very pedantic on this, but yeah, like your point on not reinventing or not creating any new, human pain points, I actually think that's a smart point for sure.
Yeah, it's the transition from unaware to problem aware, which is where creating or establishing demand comes into play, which looks different for every product and every like problem itself. Not to mention the process of trying to convince people that they have a problem to begin with.
Right. It's been interesting watching Pep build Winter, because I feel like this is a pretty new product, but also it has the adjacent field of user testing, right? So I think he can relate a lot of it to like what people are doing with UX research and user testing, but he's speaking to a different audience. So I find what he's doing really interesting there. He's doing a lot of educational content and relating it to copywriting, CRO, and product marketing and positioning. So he's taking problems that people are aware of and then pushing this message testing as a solution. I think that's probably the best example in our near network of somebody doing category creation. But again, it's not.
Well, and when I think about Winter Games too, like that's a prime example of leveraging thought leadership and
right.
Like thought leaders in the space. Maybe they're not talking about Winter, but they're definitely giving it validity and giving the problems that Winter solves validity by leveraging like April Dunford and all of those people in the product space.
Yeah. I will say it seems way easier and more fun to just like capture existing demand. It seems like a Sisyphean task to capture or to create demand out of nowhere. That seems very difficult to me.
There's more competition when you're meeting demand, but it is fun. It's a little bit
It's
more.
also very expensive to try to create demand for a brand new type of solution too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you miss, you can miss big, right? Like you're kind of, you're hoping that it's going to catch on and it's going to be a massive market. But if it doesn't, it's a bummer.
Yeah. All right. Creating and capturing demand, which is all really just capturing demand and speaking to existing deeply held human pain points that have existed since we all exist. Since we were created.
New demands for humanity or like needs for humanity.
we've tackled another content marketing binary, false dichotomy. You know how many of those there are, by the way? We've gone through so many of them. There's the classic content quality versus quantity. That's been talked about for years. Totally silly issue. There's capture demand versus create demand. And we talked about, blog as a publication versus a library. Like there's all these like two-sided things and we're just like breaking them apart.
Yeah, these conversations, I had a beer on an empty stomach, so here's where I am. I think these conversations are all just like us looking at something and being like, wait, that's wrong. And just unveiling the content marketing matrix. Like these are actually just lies that
I think
people in the industry created and overcomplicate to sound smart. And it's like, it's not that complicated.
These were people
trying to create demand.
Yes, like 5 years ago, and now we're shattering all of this demand, and it's not even something to begin with.
I do think a lot of success is kind of like via negativa. It's like stripping away all of these kind of superfluous added on frameworks and things and just going to the simplest line. Like that's something that I struggle with all the time with prioritizing things is like, what am I overcomplicating? Because I tend to look for the shiny, crazy, technical, complex solutions because that's the way my brain, I get interested in those things. But I'm like, what easy thing am I missing by looking over off in this direction? And there's often really easy things that we can do to accomplish what we want to accomplish.
Yeah.
Like David, we were doing that with sales. Like we were trying to like build this like robust, crazy ABM content system. And we're like, what if we just do this simple thing?
What if we just email someone? I've kind of started doing that like for our business and also my personal life. Like what are the things that I'm overcomplicating and what's like the straightest point or direction between A and B? Go do that thing. And so I'm just cutting out a bunch of shit that I realize I'm just adding to procrastinator because I'm scared.
Have you ever seen that meme template? It's like the Chad and the Virgin.
What?
It's like here, let me try to screen share real quick. It's like you know what I'm talking about, right? Like you've seen it before. On the left side there's this like morose looking dude who is the virgin in this thing. And then the Chad is over here. So it's like the Chad is always like, doesn't give a shit. Like just, does the basic stuff. Like if this was a fitness thing, it'd be like Chad tracks macros, lifts heavy. And then like virgin would be like does intermittent fasting, 16-4 split, like blood glucose monitor, like all these crazy things. So I feel like that's the case sometimes with content too. Like I saw this Reddit thread and somebody was asking for SEO advice and the person's like, all right, you have to do keyword research and then follow up with NLP keywords, latent semantic analysis, do like this TLD4, blah, 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 blah. And like, it went on. And it's like, what? Yeah, no one does that. Like, and then like the Chads over there, like write good shit, just ranks. It's like content and links. That's basically it. I feel like that's the case with so many things.
But if we simplified stuff too much,
no one would take our courses.
We don't sound smart. Yeah. I mean, complexity sells. It's
some people
like one of the biggest heuristics that we have to deal with.
I know. That's why I feel like sometimes this stuff trickles down to like people just talk so much. I'm like, just do the work, like, and go home. It just creates demand for so much like kind of smoke.
Do the work.
Do the work.
That's a takeaway. Don't worry about if you're creating or establishing demand. Just do the work.
Just make revenue. That's your fucking job.
That's it. Easy.